guys, it's Emily. I'm going to show you how to ice a cake today, and what I'm going to do is a two-step process. So the first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to what we call a crumb coat, and then I'm going to show you how to actually ice the cake itself. And then I'll give you a couple of little tips on what you can do to get your icing nice and smooth and make it look really good for your blank canvas that you can do all of your decorating on. So I have a big sheet cake here that I'm going to show you guys how to ice. So let me adjust the screen so you guys can get a better look at it, and then I will show you how to crumb coat. So hang on just one sec. Let me adjust so you get a better view, and then that way you can see the cake itself. Okay, so first, we got to talk about what we're going to do, what we need to ice the cake. First of all, you're going to need a spatula. This is an offset spatula, so that means it has this little bend right here in the spatula itself. You can use a regular spatula if you want to, just as long as you have something that is going to meet your needs. So a lot of people use this offset spatula. It's really easy to maneuver, and it works really well because I'm left-handed, and I know that is kind of strange for a lot of people, but if you're right-handed, you're just going to mirror what I do. If you're left-handed, then you can just follow along as well. But it's a righty or a lefty, and it also has a little thumb groove right here, so you can help maneuver it a little bit easier. And it has these little grips on the edge that you can use to grip it as well. So I recommend getting one of these. You can find these at your craft store. You can find these at Walmart even, I think. So they're pretty well readily available to most people. Then we're going to need some crumb coat, and I have some in just this little container here. And crumb coat, if you're not familiar, crumb coat is thinned out buttercream. So you want to make this a pretty thin consistency of icing. So you can see it's very easily stirred in your container. It's thinner. It sort of looks a little thinner, if you can kind of see that there. So it has a thinner consistency than your traditional buttercream. And the way that you thin it out is just to add water, about a teaspoon at a time. So you're going to add a little bit of water to your regular buttercream, about a teaspoon at a time, until you get it to the consistency that you want it to be. You don't want it to be too thin because then it's not going to set up, but you don't want it to be so thick that it's going to pull your cake away and pull up a big hunk of cake. So go for a thinner consistency. If you're talking about as far as how do I know what the consistency is, if you stick your spatula down in it, it doesn't hold up very well. It just kind of flops over. So that's the consistency that you want to go for. It's thin enough that it can't hold your spatula in place. It just falls over. Okay, so that's what we're going to use for our crumb coat. And then after we crumb coat and that sets, we're going to use our regular buttercream. I have some in this fancy schmancy butter bowl here. And your traditional buttercream, you want to be more of a medium consistency. So again, it's going to be a little thicker than your crumb coat. It's going to look more like this. And it's easily stirred, but again, when you set your spatula down in it, it actually holds the spatula up a little bit, okay? So you want it to be more of a medium consistency. And then that way, when you ice your cake, it's going to cover really well, and you won't see the cake through the icing. Okay, so just make sure you have a medium consistency in this icing. So that's going to be the icing that we're going to use on our cakes. And then you just have yourself a nice sheet cake here. This one I baked and let cool. This is a 12 by 18 sheet cake that I'm going to show you how to do today. This also works for any other shape of cake. If you do round, if you do square, works pretty well for cakes of all sizes. Now you can see I have this on a cake board. Some people like to put the little squares of wax paper underneath their cake. but that's not really my thing. I feel like it just makes a little bit more of a mess than you really need. But you are certainly welcome to do that. So you just put those little squares, those little wax paper squares under your cake, and then when you ice it and it sets, you can pull those wax paper squares out from underneath your cake, and then that way it makes it a little bit cleaner on the board, so you don't have icing all over your board. If you're not a very experienced cake decorator, you might want to try that your first few times until you get used to decorating a cake. So we're going to crumb coat first, and again, I'm going to use my thinned out buttercream. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to show you how to crumb coat. And then again, in my next video, we're going to show you how to actually ice the cake. The two methods are pretty similar, so there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. The only thing is, when you're working with your crumb coat, you're not so worried about precision. You just want to get the icing on the cake so that you can seal down those crumbs. You can see here, you know, along the edge of your cake, you sometimes have little crumbs, and you have little crumbs on the front of your board and the sides of your board. So we're just really concerned about sealing down those crumbs. That's precisely what a crumb coat is meant to do. Some people don't like to crumb coat because they feel like they're icing their cake twice, but I feel like it's really a necessary step in order to get a really professional looking result. So get a good amount of buttercream on your spatula. I'm going to set this aside. And then all you want to do is just go along the edges of your cake. I like to do my edges first, and then I do my top last. Just go along your edges and make a very thin coating. And then, like I said, it doesn't matter if you get crumbs in your icing, because that's the whole point. You're wanting to seal down those crumbs, okay? So you'll be able to see your cake actually through the icing this way, okay? You can see the cake through there, but that's okay. That's what you want, because you're sealing down those crumbs. So all you're going to do is just take your icing, and always make sure that you keep icing between your spatula and the cake. You never want your spatula to not have icing between the spatula and the cake, especially when you're actually icing your cake. When you're crumb coating, it's not such a big deal because you are going to get crumbs in your icing. But when you're actually icing the cake, you always keep your icing between the spatula and the cake. So it always has that buffer, so that way you can ice it back and forth or as many times as you want without worrying about pulling up those crumbs. But right now we're not worried about pulling out crumbs because that's what we want. We want to seal down the crumbs. So just take your icing, and again, just go all the way down the side of your cake, and then just proceed on to the next side of your cake. And again, I like to do the sides first, then I do my top. Okay, so we're just gonna take some icing, get a little blob of icing on there, and then just seal down those crumbs. And you can see it's kind of piled up a little bit here on the top, and that's okay, because again, we're just sealing down crumbs. You'll still get crumbs in your icing, and that's okay too. So just smear that around. Make sure you get the corners on both sides. So that's two sides, and then I'll show you a little bit at the top, and then I'll go ahead and crumb coat the rest, and then in the next video I'll show you how to actually ice your cake. So again, when I'm icing the top of my cake, just keep the icing between your spatula and your cake, and just kind of go in a back and forth, up and down motion, and just spread that all over your cake in a very thin layer. So you can see how thin this layer of icing is. You can see that there are crumbs all in it. There's all kinds of crumbs in there. But that's what we want, because we're sealing those crumbs down. So you're going to take the top, ice that, and then again just kind of scrape off the edge, seal that down, because you don't want a very thick layer. You want a thin crumb coat seal layer on your top, okay? And then you just add more as you go along. that's it. That's it for crumb coating. And just keep icing along until you get all of your crumbs sealed down. Okay? So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to actually ice the cake. Because what we want to do is we want to let this crumb coat set for just a few minutes until it's no longer tacky to the touch, it's a little drier to the touch, and then we're going to actually ice the cake. So we'll see you in the next video on how to actually ice your entire cake.